back at WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively into football season here. We've discussed a lot of Lamar, a lot of Ravens. We're doing a lot of that stuff. We also have big election coming up around here, doing a lot of local election stuff, certainly out on the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery. I'll be giving away some Raven scratch-offs as well with our friends at Goodwill and Window Nation. That's going on all month, but there's so many cool things happening here, especially on the backside of the plague, not just concerts and events like the Cal Senior event last week, shut down for a couple years, but symposiums, cool people coming in, cool lectures, things happening. So when I found out that Elie Mystal would be here at Loyola a little later on, even though I'm wearing my Coppin shirt today, they're our partners. Basketball starts soon. Go on. This is on the 19th at Loyola, the Constitution and the right to privacy. Mystal will discuss where and how constitutional scholars have found a right to privacy in the Constitution, how it relates to abortion and other rights. He's known for writing about the law and politics, breaking down Supreme Court decisions, and presenting up-to-the-minute coverage. Yes, I'm reading the Supreme Court confirmation battles. Mystal is the justice correspondent for The Nation. That's how I know about him, see him on TV. He writes about politics and social and racial justice. He is here. He's got a book and all that cool stuff. But more than that, you're coming to our town on the 19th, be at McGuire Hall at 6 o'clock. It's free, but you got to register ahead of time, and I'm sure there'll be a line because this Roe versus Wade thing's kind of a big deal, right, Elie? I mean, this is, at least half the society's really into this, and this is important with the election coming up. First off, welcome on, familiar with your work. When I had an opportunity to have you on, I'm like, yes, and more yes. So welcome.
Nestor, thanks so much for having me. I noticed that you're not talking Orioles at this time of year. It's as a Met fan, that's near and dear to my heart.
You're welcome. We gave you Buck, okay?
Yeah,
all right, good.
Buck's a good guy. We thank you for him.
Gave you 69 too. My dad's been dead 30 years and still angry about that. So, well, now I know you're Mets, man. I had Ian Eagle on this week too, and he does the Brooklyn Nets. I said I've gotten out of Manhattan to really feel what's going on in the other boroughs and stuff. I mean, you come down here to Baltimore, and I don't know outside in or how you spend time here, but I founded Baltimore Positive a couple years ago. I sort of famously thought about running for mayor, didn't, doing this instead, using my media platform to try to create change. You come in and do a thing like this, you find Baltimore and the opinions of Baltimore and all that, but you're finding the same thing in this country where the Constitution has been misinterpreted by many, and there's people like you that try to come and give clarity to people that haven't. I mean, I've studied sports my whole life, and the Mets and the Orioles. I mean, you've been up to your elbows in this, and it's so important for people to understand what's being taken away from them and the misinformation that's out there.
Well, part of it is just, I mean, as you're hitting the nail right on the head, part of it is just coverage, right, Nestor? I mean, think of it this way. Think about how many reporters, mainstream media, Web 2.0 media, think about how much coverage we have of the President of the United States. Think about how much coverage we have of Congress, right? Versus think about how much coverage we have of the judicial branch, the courts. The Supreme Court is a co-equal branch of government to the first two I just mentioned, but in the media it is covered, much less than a third of the time, something closer to a 20th of the time in terms of just kind of airtime. And so people
my Catholic schoolboys going back and saying Father, Son, Holy Ghost. That's the whole it's out there. It's the one we don't talk about, right? Literally,
but it's
right?
doing something, right? It's part of the Trinity. And so the idea, part of the idea of my career is just to shine some light and bring some transparency onto this branch of government, because a lot of it is, look, I don't actually believe I need to do a lot of spin, Nestor. I believe that if I can just explain what the court is actually doing in ways that regular people can understand it, then people without a law degree would be just as pissed off about what they're doing as I am.
Well, listen, I've traveled the whole state having crab cakes, and I've talked famously about being out on the Eastern Shore or in Western Maryland. We have this big race with Heather Mazier and Andy Harris here as an insurrectionist. And, there have been places I go into, the F. Bidens and the guns and the NRA, but it's been sort of sold to people as freedom. You know what I mean? And it's unbelievable to hear anybody on the right side of the aisle speak to their constituency in terms of freedom means taking away rights of other people of color, women, just anyone that they wish to, that it's somehow marketed as freedom. And that's the weirdest part of this, is true alternative facts, as was once spoken, right?
Yeah, you're talking about people who think the Constitution is the Second Amendment and a bunch of suggestions, right? And even their interpretation of the Second Amendment, I write about this a bit in my book. Even their interpretation of the Second Amendment is not an interpretation of the Second Amendment that goes back to the founding of the country and James Madison and the Bill of Rights. It's an interpretation of the Second Amendment that goes back to like 1972 in Cincinnati, because that is when the NRA was taken over by hardline gun. Before the revolt at Cincinnati, as it's called, the NRA was just like normal, like marksmen and Bambi's mom killers. Like just that's what they did, right? They were harmless in that way. But after this kind of Cincinnati revolution in the 70s, that's when the NRA was taken over by hardliners. That's when it was kind of taken over by the gun lobby, the gun manufacturing lobby. And that's when they kind of invented this new interpretation of the Second Amendment, that you needed a gun for personal self-protection as opposed to for sport or for war. Because the gun lobby realized that you would sell more guns if people felt like they needed a gun to be personally safe in their home. And that change, that switch, is what these people now, who like paint themselves in the American flag, that's what they think that they are defending. They're not defending a constitutional principle. They're defending an ad campaign from the 70s that has risen to the point where it's infected our politics in so many dangerous and bloodthirsty ways.
Well, we've had Kavanaugh and others now sit in front and raise their hand to their creator and say, Roe versus Wade settled law, right? And then this thing happens in the last 6 months. Clearly, we're going to vote across this country in lots of different ways as to who we're sending to Washington, representatives, who's going to be on one side of the aisle. But the division on this issue it's astonishing to me that I would say, think they can get away with it, but have they already gotten away with it to some degree? That this is where we're now discussing this as a thing where there are 45-year-olds. My wife's 50 years old. She had never known a discussion of this, or that any rational people in this country would ever be able to take control of that specific issue, which is their uterus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Look, Kavanaugh lied. Amy Coney Barrett lied. They lied. That's what they do. They lied. And they lied to Congress, and that's just the reality of it. Because conservatives have spent the better part of 40 years building an entire legal philosophy around the idea of overturning Roe v. Wade, and specifically overturning the right to privacy. So the way that we even get to a constitutional protection of abortion, the way we get to a constitutional protection of contraception, the way we get to a constitutional protection of the right to marry, of the right to family, of the right to raise your kids the way you want to raise your kids, all of that comes down to the right to privacy. And the idea that the Constitution kind of doesn't make sense unless it includes a right to be private in your own home, right? There's no point in writing a Fourth Amendment. The government cannot illegally and unreasonably search and seize your property and documents. There's no reason to write that down unless there is the assumption that you have a right to privacy in what's in your own drawer. Right. So the idea that the right to privacy doesn't exist, which is what the conservatives built their legal theory to attack, it attacks not just the right to an abortion. It attacks the right to contraception. It attacks the right to marriage. It attacks the right to family. All of these other things. Abortion is the canary in the coal mine. But that's too weak. Abortion is the tip of the spear. Right, it is the first puncture.
This is not a single issue fight. Is right, what you're saying. It's exactly made that way to your case in the media. 80% of the talk around it is that, but that other 20% will get you underneath too.
Right, and it's really been disheartening to me, just how few people really understood what Roe v. Wade even stood for, right? Because they have been listening to right-wing media for so long that they believed the lies, basically. They believe Roe v. Wade means abortion on demand. No, it doesn't, and it never did. That was never the idea. The whole point of Roe v. Wade was simply that before fetal viability, the government could not restrict abortion rights, and after fetal viability, which is 22, 23, 24 weeks, the government could restrict abortion rights, and did regularly. So when you talk to people who are like, well, I don't think that there should be abortion on demand, but there should be some kind of zone of possibility where women can still have a right to their own body. Yeah, that was Roe, and that is what they took away.
Elie Mystal is here, and I love your name because Elrod Hendricks. Come on, man. You already started the baseball ish with me, right? Elie played in the '69 World Series against the Mets, but Elie was just such a beautiful man, a great Oriole, and anybody named Elie, I'm gonna probably get along with. Elie Mystal is here, and will be here on October the 19th. The Constitution and the right to privacy. I guess that's right in the wheelhouse of what we're talking about right this moment. 6 p.m. at McGuire Hall. You can register at loyola.edu. Go find them. It's the Humanities in Action. And some of this stuff, come on, Elie, you were zooming it into classrooms and like all the MSNBC, all the work that you're doing. I guess you're going to get on a train, doing whatever you're doing and coming down here. Maybe, I don't know. If the Mets are playing like NLCS that night, 6 o'clock, you may need me over in the corner giving you hand signals, letting you know who's up and who's down. But you're coming down, being a part of this and getting back out again. You come to a place like Baltimore. What can people expect that night? And for folks who haven't maybe done this sort of thing, that have been more politically active, to say, I'll go over to Loyola. I love Loyola. I'll go over there and see the nice man from television teach me things. What do you do when you come in for these things?
Well, I am so grateful to be back on the road again in person, because one of the things that I like to do in person is answer people's questions. As I said at the beginning, the law is opaque and it shouldn't be. The law is clandestine and it shouldn't be. It should be out in the open.
It feels overwhelming, man. It feels heavy.
It shouldn't. People should be able to explain the law in terms that you don't need a law degree to understand. We do it with everything else. Right? When Jim Cramer is telling you which stocks to buy, right? He doesn't need you to be a quant to understand what's up and what's down. They have graphs to show you that, right? So people with legal training also need to make sure that the law is accessible to people. And you'll note, Nestor, I'm not saying dumb it down. Dumbing it down does nobody any good. Losing nuance does
PowerPoint for crying out loud,
does nobody, right? But just take some of the jargon out and explain what people are saying in regular terms. So when you come to the event, I'll have my little spiel, of course. But the key to me is always the question and answer part of the evening, where people can ask me, their legal questions about why something works the way it does, and I can answer it I can come and meet them where they are and answer their question. And the great thing about doing it live is that you can see on people's faces, right? So if I use a word or a legal term of art that people don't understand, I can see it on their face. Oops, I said something way too nerdy. Let me rephrase that using a more accessible language, right? So that's one of the reasons why I love the live thing. The Amtrak, I can take or leave.
Wi-Fi's a little wonky from time to time,
Right, it's all right. I'll deal.
Well, the book is Allow Me to Retort, right? So that is someone comes say, Mr. You don't know Second Amendment. Well, allow me to retort. So I like that. A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution. Been on sale for about 6 months now. It's out. I guess you're touring a little bit behind this as much as people reading it, and obviously a bestseller, all of that. How did you get so smart? Where did let's start with, writing books and being this guy who has become sort of a modern sort of wisdom guy when it comes to really thick stuff for guys from Dundalk who, just went to the University of Baltimore and just tried to get through and get a gig.
well, my mama didn't suffer no fools, so that's pretty important.
What did your parents do?
So my mother was a speech pathologist. She works with hearing impaired children and helps them to talk. So talking was always super important in my house. And my father, this is where the name comes from, Elie. My father's from Haiti and came over and kind of started a newspaper that kind of went belly up as one does back in the 70s, and then kind of got into local.
Every newspaper I ever worked for has gone belly, other than Baltimore Sun. So yeah,
that's what they do. And then eventually got into local politics. So I come from a family. My parents were very involved in the civil rights movement. I come from a family that cared about this stuff, but none of them had any legal training. And so I thought, why, when you're a kid, you're always trying to figure out what am I going to do that's special? I thought going to law school would be my special thing. I hated it. That was ooh. Like law school did not.
What
Law
did you
school
think
and
you
I.
were going to be when you grew up? At that point, what did you think you were going to use a legal degree for?
Well, I thought I would run, right? Before I thought I would run for office until I realized that people that run for office also have to raise money, which I'm terrible at. So at first I thought I was going to run. But then I thought I would just be, like a lawyer, like a person who took cases and maybe kind of a political lawyer, so somebody who would end up kind of in the attorney general's office. And one of the things I really didn't like about the law, I talk about this a lot in my book, the law is it's a box, right? They want you to your idea doesn't matter if you can't find an old dead white guy who agrees with your idea. And I find that intellectually limiting. I don't I don't think that that's necessarily the way that our system should
You're
be.
a precedent guy is what you're saying.
Designed. Right, look, I'm precedent is one of many factors that I'm willing to look at, but like I judge my precedents based on whether the precedent was made at a time when everybody was allowed to participate, right? So like, quite frankly, Nestor, like you give me a precedent before 1965 and I'm like, why do I care about that? America was functionally an apartheid state before 1965 because it wasn't until 1965 that we passed the Voting Rights Act. And it wasn't until the Voting Rights Act that we approached anything close to universal suffrage and universal participation in this democracy. So if you give me a law, a precedent, a case, or whatever that was issued before 1965, before Black people and women and minorities had a say in what those laws were going to be, I'm not going to ignore it. But it's going to be at best like the garnish on the side of my meal, right? At best, it's going to be the baked potato, not the steak.
Yeah, it's a good old boy law.
Right? Like, and maybe it has value. I'll look, right? But but the idea that like the law that was passed when only rich white men were allowed to pass laws is the thing that I should be most concerned about. Nah. No. There is no theory of government. There is no theory of law that suggests that I, as a free Black man in 2022, should be following laws as they would have been interpreted by my captors. No, we're gonna think about things a little bit differently, and that's kind of what my book is about, and that's kind of what I try to bring to the table when I do legal analysis. Not that these old precedents and old laws and old statutes and old clauses don't matter; they just don't matter as much.
So when we know all of this, right, and even someone agrees with all of your thoughts, they buy your book, they come out, they'll come into Loyola this week. At the end of the day, beyond voting and where this thing goes, where is this thing going at this point when the Obama administration's about to end and everybody plays nicey nice for a couple of months when there's a dead Supreme Court justice and they don't fill the seat. Now Merrick Garland may be in the end the one that puts Trump away. Who knows? But this last 4 years of hokey pokey with the courts and stacking and should we add to the court, all of those questions are in play. And I guess in about 6 weeks, we're going to have another election under us. I mean, I know you've spoken out about Herschel Walker, some of his kids and his ex-wife and everybody else. And by the way, can I say this, Elie? I want to have a little comedy here while we have this. Today is the Day of Atonement. I once had Herschel Walker on my show, so I'm asking for forgiveness. I had Dr. Oz on my show once too. Double forgiveness on Day of Atonement. So I'm atoned for 2 years. So there's my comedy, but literally. Elie, it's not comedy, dude. I mean, dude's over from New Jersey drinking wine, running for Senate. I mean, whack jobs, this crazy woman in Georgia, add on Herschel. I mean, we got Andy Harris here. I've had Heather Mazier on. I haven't openly campaigned for anybody other than her. But the most important thing in all of this is voting, we thought. But even in that case, we still have insurrectionists running around here free, and the people that started the party 2 years later not in jail. It's things are slow to move in this country right now, pal.
The law is slow, and the idea that it bends towards justice, as Martin Luther King said, is not always correct. When you talk about the long arc of history of bending towards justice, you got to talk really long. Let's put it like that. In the short term, it does not necessarily bend towards justice without energy from the people who are going to be justice warriors. Now, one of the reasons why Republicans seem to be winning on all of these cultural issues is because Republicans have always prioritized the Supreme Court and Supreme Court justices, knowing that it is the Supreme Court more than Congress and more than the president even that can bring them these large scale cultural victories, as we're seeing with abortion rights, as we've seen with gun rights, as we're seeing with the Republican unreasonable opposition to climate change legislation, right? Republican base voters, I do not believe, are any smarter than Democratic base voters. But Republican base voters have been told for a generation that anything they want, they can only have if they have the courts. So if you want your guns, you got to have the courts. If you want your Christian theocracy, you got to have the courts. If you don't like two men kissing on each other in the restaurant, well, then you got to have the courts. We tell Republicans all the time that they have to have the courts in order to get their cultural victories. And that is why you will see Republicans vote for hypocrites like Herschel Walker, for people from New Jersey like that's why they will vote for these people, because they understand that the courts are that important. Flip it around to the Democratic base voters, and we do not understand that the courts are as important as they are. So you can go talk to a kid, talk to a millennial who cares about climate change, who cares about gun violence, who wants movement on these issues, and they'll just talk to you, well, we got to get a president that's better than Biden. And I'm like, it's the Supreme Court, silly. It's the Supreme Court has the veto power on all of the other branches. So right now we're talking about abortion, right? And we're saying like, oh, we need Congress to pass a national law protecting abortion rights. Man, John Roberts and his crew will overturn a national abortion protection law before breakfast. All right, they'll do that with their Frosted Flakes. They have that'll be an easy law for them to overturn. You can't get any law on gun violence through this Supreme Court. You can't get any law on climate change. Green New Deal, we can't get this Supreme Court to support the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act. Green New Deal is a pipe dream with this Supreme Court. So if there's something that you care about on the liberal, and I would argue fact-based side of the agenda, then you have to have the Supreme Court. But Democrat voters don't think of it that way. And that is why we get into situations where like, well, I like her, but not, I like a woman, but not that woman. Oh, I don't like her because of the emails. Oh, I don't like that. Like, that's how we get into these situations.
Elie Mystal will be in Baltimore on the 19th of the month. I highly encourage you to go out to loyola.edu. You sign up, free registration, stop over. You know the books. And so you mentioned this. The Republican agenda about the courts is very, very obvious, and sort of the foul play in getting these people involved, and not even any investigation of how Brett Kavanaugh winds up in skyboxes at Nationals games, Mr. Baseball fan, right. Amongst other things.
Baseball tickets, right, Brett, right.
But more than and beer. And I love both of those things. Sometimes together, oftentimes together. But for me, listen, the way our government, Schoolhouse rocked me. Put me back in Colgate Elementary. I'm in third grade, just trying to understand three branches of government. All right, President, we all vote for that. 50 states, electoral college. Sounds like bullshit to me, but I'll accept that, right? Senators from states, congressmen. We got more people. We get more congressmen. That's how we figure this out. We stay. Supreme Court. Oh, we give the person a gig for life.
Yep.
What? Like, that is of all of the ish that I don't understand that would keep any sort of supremacy supreme, and whatever that would be based on race, color, creed, religion, power, ego, wherever kings and queens and emperors and all that stuff. You get a gig for life, defining law for the rest of your life as appointed by someone in 1984. Like it's insane. I mean, that unto itself, it's the most insane law of any law, bills of rights, anything I've ever read. I'm like, gig for life on a court that decides everything. What?
Yeah. So look, the Constitution was written at a time before Robitussin, right? The Constitution was written at a time where you could die from having a bad trip to the bathroom.
Well, life was only till like 46, right? Like literally,
and so,
right?
In that context, when you're going to appoint somebody who's 45, 50 years old for life, that's like
I I'm 53. If you're appointing me something for the rest of my life, I hope I enjoy it,
right?
whatever it
but like,
is.
if you're 53 and you get appointed for life in 1787, like that's a couple of winters away, right? But the Constitution was not written to understand what life would look like in a time of Pfizer. So it's one of the reasons why the Constitution needs to be amended and the Supreme Court needs to be reformed. Now, if you look at the issue of term limits, that is one of the most popular issues in the country. Large majorities of both Democrats and Republicans favor some term limits on Supreme Court justices. There's lots of ideas out there for how do we get there.
I mean, 6 years, 8 years, something, right? Come on, man.
Even
right?
15, I could live with, the difference between 10 or 15 years and life is another 10 or 15 years. So yeah, we could have some discussion about what the limit should be. But the problem is that the Constitution says very little about how the Supreme Court should function. Doesn't say anything about how many people should be on the Supreme Court, and things of that nature. But it does say that they serve for life. That's pretty clear. So I think that in order to get term limits, you have to either amend the Constitution or you have to expand the court with enough justices who agree that term limits are constitutional, and then you pass your term limits bill. So like one of the ways that I like people to try to think about court expansion is that court expansion is the tranquilizer dart before you put on the tracking collar that is Supreme Court reform, right? So like if you do it in the wrong order, if you want to track a hippo, trank it first, then put on the collar, right? You do that in the wrong order, you end up as dinner. And that is the same thing about the Supreme Court. If you try to pass a bill into this Supreme Court that limits their power, the 6 conservatives on the Supreme Court will simply say, no, our power can't be limited. Go back home. Get out of my face.
We are supreme. We are supreme.
So you got to put on the court enough justices who think the Supreme Court's power can be limited, and then pass your law limiting their power, whether through term limits, whether through ethics reforms, whether through a bunch of other things. So I talk about court packing from a straight up nonpartisan. Like obviously I have beliefs that I would like the court to agree with, but beyond even those beliefs, there are nonpartisan reform reasons for court expansion, because if we expand the court, we will be able to pass bills like term limits, pass bills like ethics reform, pass bills like jurisdiction stripping that will limit the power of these unelected, unaccountable clergy and reform them to work within our system as opposed to above our system.
What do you think happens to Trump and all this in January 6th and the aftermath of all? I mean, a lot of people going to jail who were there, and obviously Supreme Court justice's wife running bus trips. Like that's not a rumor, that's fact. And being very involved in this. I know Americans who are disturbed enough to be trying to marry Canadians and Australians, and I mean, like it's crazy that we're 19, 20 months out now, and really the core of what we all saw happen that day has been largely unprosecuted by the orchestrators.
Everything that I know about the difference between the white criminal justice system and the black criminal justice system tells me that Trump, as a rich white man, will get away with all of it. Because most of the time, rich white men get away with all of it. Now, Trump is unique in that he seems to have committed more crime than the average rich white man, and he seems to continually commit crime. I mean, if you think about the espionage charges that he's looking at now, these are crimes that he committed after he left office, right? So like the nature of Trump is to crime. And so there is, so those are the kind of, it's what happens when the immovable object meets the irresistible force. The irresistible force is that Trump commits crime all the time. The immovable object is that rich white people don't go to jail for crime. What happens when those meet, I still don't know. And my hope is that eventually the sheer weight and tonnage of Trump's crimes land him in some kind of accountability situation. But history says that he gets away with it.
Elie Mystal, he'll be here in town. You can follow him out on the interwebs, buy his book. He'll show up on TV. And I appreciate you getting dressed up for us, and your familiar setting behind, and I appreciate you making some time. And I hope everybody comes down on the 19th and visits with you at Loyola. How much of this do you do? Zooming in and zooming out, and Amtrakking and flying, and I guess you're getting back in a little bit of routine, as you said. You enjoy it, right? I mean, even in the
I
red
used to
states,
do it. I used
I
to
don't
do
want to
it
promote
much.
that you were on Mike Huckabee's show, but you don't have any problem taking on facts to the other side of the fence, which is something that, I get shot around for, because I don't know if you've noticed or not, most of the baseball fans vote red. So most of my name's Aparicio, but I mean, over the last 30 years, I've really learned people don't want to hear truths. Even when you have evidence, they don't want to hear it.
Which is why I do what I do. Like I said at the beginning, Nestor, like I am trying to shine transparency on a branch of government, on an entire branch of government that operates in the dark. And I will shine that light pretty much where anybody will take me, as long as it doesn't conflict with homecoming for my kids or or their events or errands.
Hey, enjoy the fall. As was once said, let's go Mets. All right, good.
Mets.
All right. Hey, nobody here would be angry at Buck winning. I don't know if the Machado, we still have some warmth for him, but I have my Tony Gwynn jersey in the closet, so it's the only jersey I wear these days. So I'll have that out. Enjoy the baseball and enjoy the ride into Baltimore. And if you need a good crab cake, I'm your guy. You don't want to be eating any tourist crab cakes while you're here, brother. All right.
All right. I'll keep that in mind, man.
Elie Mystal, he'll be watching baseball on the 19th and lecturing over at Loyola at the McGuire Hall. You can find him at loyola.edu. I am Nestor. We are WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.